3 weeks after he sold the house I'd spent half my life building, I saw my son kneeling outside my gate. Rain poured down his face, his hands trembling as he pounded on the iron door I had locked myself. The streetlight cast a yellow glow on him, on that same face I once called my pride, now twisted by fear and regret. He cried, "Dad, please, I was wrong." I stood behind the curtain, silent, and in that moment I realized this wasn't punishment. It was justice, not for me, but for the soul he'd lost to greed. You might ask, what kind of father could watch his own son kneel in the rain and not open the gate? I asked myself the same thing, but before you judge me, you need to hear the whole story. Because what happened 3 weeks earlier changed everything I believed about love, loyalty, and blood. Sometimes, pain is the only language left to wake a dying conscience. I used to think nothing could break a father's heart more than losing his child. But I was wrong. There's a deeper kind of pain when you lose your child while he's still alive. The son I raised with my bare hands, with trust and sacrifice, became the very person who signed my home away for money. And the final thing you'll hear in this story, I promise, will leave you speechless, because when that gate finally opened, there wasn't just an apology waiting. There was a truth, so sharp it could make your soul tremble. I was born into poverty, but I never felt ashamed of it. My mother died young, and my father left me only one lesson. If you can't leave your son anything but honor, then keep that honor clean. I carried those words my whole life. 30 years in a metal workshop, my hands thick with calluses, my back bent by time. All I ever wanted was to build a house, one that my son could one day look at and say, "My father built this with his own hands." And I did. Every brick, every door, every nail was a piece of my life's work. My son, David, grew up in that house. He was sharp, clever, quick with words, and always dreamed big. I used to think I was the luckiest man alive to have him. But as he grew older, something in his eyes began to change. A glint I'd seen before in men who valued power more than peace. When he married, I saw that same reflection in his wife's eyes. The look of someone who measures everything in money. I didn't say a word. I told myself it was just youth, that love would teach them what real happiness costs. But slowly, our dinners grew quieter. The laughter faded, replaced by phone calls about investments, new business plans, and whispers I was never meant to hear. I could feel it. I was becoming invisible inside the very home I had built. Sometimes David would say, "Dad, maybe we should sell this place, get something better, bigger, newer." I'd laugh, thinking he was joking. I didn't realize then, that same sentence, repeated again and again, like a haunting melody, was the first sign of the storm that was coming. A storm that would take more than just a roof over my head. It would take the trust between a father and his son. It started with little things, so small I almost brushed them off. David began spending long hours on the phone, stepping outside whenever I entered the room. His voice would drop to a whisper, his tone clipped, tense. Once I caught him glancing at me mid-call, eyes darting away as if caught doing something wrong. When I asked, he smiled and said, "Just work, Dad. You wouldn't understand." Then came the missing papers. One morning, I went to the cabinet where I kept the house deed, the tax receipts, all the documents tied to the home I'd built. The envelope was gone. I searched every drawer, every folder, even behind the old photo frames. Nothing. When I confronted David, he looked surprised, too surprised, and said he had moved them for safekeeping. My gut twisted. He'd never touched those papers in his life. At dinner, the air grew thick. His wife avoided my eyes, stabbing at her food without a word. I tried to bring up family matters, stories from when David was a boy, but my words hung in the air like smoke. The warmth that once filled that house had turned into a quiet, invisible wall separating us. One night, I couldn't sleep. I heard voices in the living room, David and his wife arguing. "We need that money," she hissed. "It's our chance." He said something I couldn't catch, but I heard my name, sharp, cutting, followed by silence. My heart sank. I wanted to believe I was mistaken, that it was just stress or some business I didn't understand. But something inside me whispered the truth. I was no longer part of their plans. The next morning, David brought me coffee, smiling as if nothing had happened, but his hands trembled slightly as he set the cup down. In that tiny shake, I saw the fracture, the first crack in the bond between us. I didn't know it yet, but the ground beneath my home had already begun to shift, and soon, everything I thought was safe would collapse. It was a Tuesday, ordinary, silent, cruelly normal. I had gone out early to fix a neighbor's fence, something to keep my hands busy and my mind calm. When I came back that afternoon, a black SUV was parked in the driveway. A man in a suit stood on my porch, clipboard in hand, speaking to David. I slowed my steps. Something about their posture, the handshake, the polite smiles, didn't feel right. When the man saw me, he nodded awkwardly and said, "Congratulations, sir. You made a good sale." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. "Sale?" I repeated, my voice cracking. I turned to David. He avoided my eyes. His wife appeared behind him, clutching a folder. "Dad," he began softly, We sold the house. It was time. You deserve to rest, not worry about this place anymore." My knees almost gave out. "You sold my house?" I whispered. "The house I built with my hands?" He tried to justify it, said something about opportunity, about how the market was right, how the money would help us all. But then came the sentence that burned itself into my soul. "You don't need much money at your age, Dad. Let me take care of it." That single line shattered something inside me. I looked around, the porch, the doorframe, the old swing I built for him when he was 6, all now legally his to give away. The man in the suit handed me a paper. My name was there, signed, my signature. I stared at it, cold spreading through me. It was perfect, too perfect. The dates, the ink, the notary stamp, everything legitimate. I didn't remember signing anything, but there it was. My name, clear as day. I looked at David again, and for the first time in my life, I saw a stranger wearing my son's face. My heart pounded, fury and disbelief mixing until I couldn't tell which was which. "Where am I supposed to go now?" I asked quietly. He hesitated, then gestured toward the door. "We already arranged an apartment for you, Dad. It's smaller, easier to manage. You'll like it there." His wife chimed in, her tone smooth but distant. "It's for the best, really. That old house was too much work." I didn't answer. I just turned away. The walls around me felt hollow, stripped of warmth. My footsteps echoed through the hall, my hall, and each sound reminded me that I no longer belonged there. When I stepped outside, the sun was setting behind the house I had built brick by brick. It should have been a comforting sight, but all I felt was cold. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just looked at the man who used to be my son and said, "You've sold more than just a house today, David. You've sold yourself." Then I walked away, not knowing yet that this betrayal would soon be repaid in ways he could never imagine. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I just walked away with nothing but the clothes on my back and a silence that could crush stone. People think silence means surrender. They're wrong. Silence is the sound of a storm forming. The apartment they arranged for me was small, colorless, and suffocating. Every night, I'd sit by the window staring at the skyline, replaying every word David had said. "You don't need much money at your age." Those words echoed in my mind like a taunt. But I didn't let anger guide me. Anger is loud and blind. I needed to be quiet and precise. The first thing I did was call an old friend, Martin, a retired banker who owed me a favor from decades ago. He dug into the sale records. "Your house was sold for $75,000, he said. "Way below market value. Cash deal. Buyer's name, some corporation that popped up just a month ago. A shell company. That meant someone was hiding. Someone close." I started visiting the neighborhood at dawn when no one noticed. I watched from across the street as construction workers came and went. The new owner never appeared, but the renovations didn't make sense. They weren't fixing anything, just changing. Painting over the history, erasing me. So I began my own quiet investigation. The notary who handled the documents remembered a man and a woman, my son and his wife. She'd been the one who brought the papers, claiming I'd given her power of attorney. My signature had been copied, forged cleanly, and she'd smiled the whole time. I felt my blood turn to ice, but still, I said nothing. Revenge born in rage is sloppy. Revenge born in patience, that's art. I opened a new bank account under a different name, started small transactions, bought into the same corporation that owned my house, one share at a time. No one noticed the old man moving in the shadows. Each night, I marked the calendar, one red cross for every day I stayed silent. Because silence, when held long enough, doesn't mean defeat. It means waiting for the exact moment when your enemy believes you've vanished. And that's when you strike. It took me 3 weeks to pull the strings together. 3 weeks of silence, pretending to be the broken old man they thought I was. What David didn't know was that the corporation he and his wife used to sell my house was already falling apart from the inside. All it took was one whisper, one small investment under the right name, and I was back inside. This time, not as a father, but as a ghost hidden in the paperwork. Through Martin, I found a trusted middleman, someone who could buy the house on my behalf, quietly. A contractor named Lewis, gruff, discreet, and loyal to money, not gossip. Cash only, he said. No names, no trail. Perfect. A month later, my old home was mine again. But David didn't know that. To the world, it still belonged to that corporation. He believed he'd gotten away with everything. The perfect crime sealed under a legal contract. That's when I started to rebuild. I hired workers, told them to restore the house exactly as it had been. The same color walls, same creaking steps, same kitchen tiles that David's little feet used to run across. Nostalgia is a powerful weapon. It reminds you of what you've lost just before it destroys you. Then came the cameras. Tiny, invisible, hidden in the corners of rooms and behind light fixtures. Every word, every gesture, every visit would be recorded. I wasn't looking for proof anymore. I wanted perspective. I wanted to watch my son see what it feels like to lose control. Lewis delivered the final touch, a renovation sign with a fake realtor's number. House will be listed soon, it read. David passed by a few times, curious, unaware I was watching from across the street in my car. Each time, he lingered a little longer. The guilt was starting to show. Good. I had also heard whispers. His investments were collapsing. The $75,000 from the sale was gone, sunk into a failed venture his wife had convinced him to join. And now, the people he trusted were turning on him. So I waited for the moment when desperation would bring him back to the doorstep he betrayed me for. Revenge doesn't always come with blood. Sometimes it comes with a for sale sign and a father waiting in the dark, ready to teach the lesson his son refused to learn. Every plan was in motion, every piece in place. All I needed now was for him to knock on that gate again. It started unraveling faster than I imagined. The same smooth-talking broker who had convinced David to sell the house vanished overnight, along with most of his money. The company he'd invested in turned out to be a shell inside a shell, a maze of fake addresses and disconnected numbers. I didn't have to lift a finger. The world he built on greed was collapsing on its own. One evening, I saw him from a distance, standing outside a closed office door, pounding his fist against it while the for lease sign flapped in the wind. His expensive suit hung loose on him, his face pale, hollow. I almost stepped forward, almost, but then I remembered his words. You don't need much money at your age. I stayed in the shadows. Within a week, his wife packed her things. The neighborhood whispered she'd taken what was left of their savings and disappeared to her sister's place in another state. She didn't even leave a note. David called her phone over and over until his voice broke. The only thing that answered was silence. Soon after, he lost his job. The firm couldn't keep someone whose name was now tangled in a fraud investigation. I heard through Martin that his credit was destroyed, his accounts frozen. He had gone from the son who knew better to a man who couldn't pay rent. Sometimes I saw him wandering the streets near the old neighborhood, unshaven, clutching a cheap coat, staring at my house from across the road, my house that he still didn't know I owned again. There were nights he stood there for hours, then left before dawn, like a ghost circling the life he'd traded away. and I watched, always from afar, always silent. It wasn't joy I felt, it was something colder, a heavy sadness mixed with justice. I realized that punishment doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just whispers, letting the guilty drown in the echo of their own choices. Still, part of me, the father part, kept waiting for him to come home, to knock on that gate and say the one word he'd never said before. Sorry. I didn't know when it would happen, but I knew it would, because a man who loses everything will eventually return to the place where he first betrayed love. It was raining the night he came back, the kind of rain that feels like punishment from the sky itself. I heard the knocking first, sharp and desperate against the iron gate. Then came the voice, cracked, trembling, but unmistakable. Dad, please, please open the door. I froze. My hands, calloused from years of work, suddenly felt heavy. Through the window, I saw him, soaked to the bone, his hair plastered to his face, his knees sinking into the mud. His suit was ruined, his shoes gone. He looked nothing like the proud man who once told me I was too old to understand. I stepped closer to the window, but didn't open it. Lightning flashed, illuminating his face, hollow eyes, bruised pride, broken spirit. I lost everything, Dad, he cried, clutching the bars. The house, the money, her. I have nothing left. Please, let me in. My throat tightened. Every instinct as a father screamed at me to run out, to pull him inside, to tell him it was okay. But then another voice, colder, wiser, reminded me, if you open that gate too soon, he'll never learn why it had to close. So, I stood there, silent, watching him shiver in the rain that once fell on both of us when he was a boy playing in the yard. He hit the gate once, weakly, then again, his voice breaking. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please, Dad, I don't know what to do anymore. The words echoed through the storm, cutting straight through the years between us. I felt tears on my face. I didn't even realize I was crying, but I still didn't move, because this moment wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. Finally, his strength gave out. He collapsed onto the wet ground, his forehead pressed against the metal. For a long time, there was nothing but rain and his ragged breathing. Then, quietly, I whispered to myself, now, you understand. I turned off the light, leaving him outside in the dark, not as punishment, but as the lesson every son must learn the hard way. When you betray love for greed, even the warmest home will turn cold against you. By dawn, the rain had stopped. The world was silent. That kind of silence that comes after a storm, when even the air feels like it's holding its breath. I walked to the gate, my boots sinking into the soaked ground. He was still there, leaning against the fence, eyes closed, lips blue from the cold. For a moment, I thought he was gone. I unlocked the gate. The sound of the latch made him flinch. His eyes opened slowly, confusion giving way to disbelief. Dad, he whispered, voice barely audible. I didn't speak. I just reached down, helped him to his feet, and guided him inside. His body was shaking, from cold, from shame, from everything he'd lost. I sat him by the fire, handed him a bowl of warm soup, and watched him eat in silence. The steam rose between us like a fragile truce neither dared to touch. When he finally looked up, tears in his eyes, I stood. Rest, I said simply. You're safe here. For now. Then I turned, walked toward the door, and paused just long enough to leave the folded letter on the table beside him. I stepped out into the pale morning light, feeling the weight of years lift, not because I'd won, but because I'd finally let go. In that letter, written in my rough, uneven handwriting, were only a few words. This house was never yours, David. It was never even truly mine. It belongs to the part of you that you lost, the part that knew love before it learned greed. I didn't wait for him to read it. Some lessons don't need witnesses. As I walked down the path, the first sunlight touched the roof, the same roof I once built for him. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel bitterness, only a quiet hope. that somewhere behind me, a son was finally learning how to come home.